love it or hate it, you can't deny that the infamous Brutal Doom mod was probably the most sensible mod to come along in a long time. What it does is just accentuate the already violent gameplay that Doom carried off so flawlessly and propel it into the stratosphere. It included new sounds, new animations, and it just took what was already a solid formula and pumped it full of steroids. Now, I had a lot of fun with the mod, truth be told, though at the end of the day I still prefer Vanilla Doom, but I do give credit where credit is due, and Brutal Doom was a damn good time. So it is kind of surprising that there haven't been many more mods applying this kind of concept to older shooting games. Brutal Half-Life, however, is one that comes to mind. It's a mod for the first game that's still in development by a group called Zuni Arts. In similar fashion to the Doom mod, what Brutal Half-Life does is just make things more, well, brutal. So expect to see blood and guts flying all around when you kill enemies, expect the sound effects to be louder and more punchier, and I guess overall the game just has more of an edge to it. These kind of mods work off the philosophy that if a little is good, then more must be better, and yeah, fair enough, the mod does have its high points, and the combat can be much more enjoyable and over the top. The MP5 now feels much more impactful, and the shotgun shakes the screen around when you fire it. Gordon even has a kick ability which can stun enemies and knock them back a little bit. Dismemberment is also common when attacking human enemies, and I've seen these guys crawling across the ground when they're mortally wounded, which is pretty cool. The M249 from the Opposing Force expansion pack is now dropped frequently by the marine enemies, and it's easily the most powerful weapon in the mod, just ripping enemies to pieces. Overall, the mod achieves what it sets out to do. However, it is true that Brutal Half-Life has a lot going on that just doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you what that is. For starters, the heads-up display is red, making it almost impossible to see the crosshair among other things. But on a much deeper level, the more you play the mod, the more you realise it just doesn't kinda work with the fundamentals of Half-Life as a game. I mean, in Doom it's a totally different kettle of fish because literally every single level contains dozens and dozens of monsters that you're constantly in combat with. Often after the moment you open the very first door you come across, fire your first shot, or even just as soon as the map begins, you're engaged in a gunfight with countless baddies. Half-Life is a lot more different in its pacing. I mean, there's moments where you're in combat with aliens or marines, but there's also 15 to 20 minute long segments where you don't fire a single shot or engage in combat far less frequently. I mean, it takes a good hour, if not longer, before you even fight another human enemy type. During those moments when you're not in combat, you'd be hard-pressed to tell the difference between vanilla Half-Life and Brutal Half-Life. By the time you get to later chapters like Questionable Ethics, or even segments of earlier chapters like We've Got Hostiles, things start to pick up a bit of pace, but you will still be subjected to these slower sections in between, fighting alien enemies like hound eyes or bull squids, where, as I said, the differences the mod offers seem all but trivial. Now look, Sonny Jim, I'm not trying to heap shit on the mod, and during certain gunfights it hits all the right notes. I can appreciate the exaggerated explosions, the sound effects, and the violence as much as the next guy. But the core of the mod just doesn't gel with Half-Life as well as it did with Doom. In Half-Life, the damage you take from enemies is usually more often than not based around line of sight, whereas in Doom, 90% of it is projectile based, allowing a fleet-footed and quick-witted gamer to avoid most of the incoming damage. What this means is that the hard mode in Doom, or ultra-violence if you will, can be eventually easy for players who know what they're doing. Whereas the hard mode in Half-Life is always going to be hard, and ultimately the combat doesn't quite work on the same level because of the behaviour of enemies during combat and the parameters for damage taken. And that's not the fault of the modders or Half-Life itself, it's just that Half-Life is at its core very different to Doom. Brutal Doom felt almost like a natural progression. I mean, people who'd played Doom to the point that it was a cakewalk on even the most difficult setting, and had become used to all the blood and guts, would really appreciate a mod that took the violence and difficulty to the nth degree. The only thing I didn't like about Brutal Doom was the reloading mechanic, which I feel is an antithesis to what Doom is all about, but otherwise it's a fantastic mod. And as I said, this construct in Half-Life doesn't work as well because the game is already challenging enough as it is, and the increased violence isn't utilised as much as it really could be because the gunfights are a lot more sporadic. Where I would see this mod really flourishing is in fan-made maps and content, because in the original campaign it just doesn't reach its maximum potential, which again, as I said, is no fault of the mod or the game itself, it's just Half-Life is a lot different in pacing to Doom. If you could get some fan-made huge arena-style maps and get some co-op going with a bunch of your mates alongside the marine and alien enemies, it would be an absolute blast. But at the moment, messing around with the single-player campaign is just a bit of a letdown. And yeah, it does sound good on paper. Why wouldn't the concept that works so well in one game work well in another? But the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. At the end of the day, the mod scene is always going to be hit and miss, and on a positive note, this mod is free, so it's not going to hurt the bank if you want to give it a shot. Just be aware that it hasn't quite reached its full potential yet, but that's not to say it might at some point down the track.